This is your fortnightly instalment where I interview a trailblazing physiotherapist that has shaped the profession we are today. In celebrating their journey, knowledge and insights, you gain the opportunity to plan and guide your own professional journey. My name is Doug Carey and welcome to Physio+10.
Welcome past the new listeners to Physio+10. Special guest today is Richmond Heath. Thanks for joining us, Richmond.
Thanks for having us along, Doug.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hey, can you give us a bit of a background about where you grew up and your early schooling?
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm. It was basically a beef, sheep, crops, a bit of lucerne hay farm in central Victoria, up near Maroondah, near Shepparton. So I was really lucky to have a great connection with the land and animals, especially. Went to the local Catholic primary school, Catholic secondary school, until I went to boarding school down in Melbourne, where my brothers had been. I was the fifth child in the family. Eldest brother was maybe 11 years older than me. I had three brothers and a sister. So, it was a really wonderful place to grow up. The connection, the farm was backed onto the Goulburn River, and just all this open space and the time. And also being the youngest child, I had a lot of time to kind of just wonder, pass a lot of tools.
Wonder?
A bit of both, but mainly just wondering because, the older brothers were doing more of the work and I was kind of passing the tools and that. So I did have a lot of time growing up, to contemplate and spend in nature and spend with animals.
So do you reckon I've never talked to a person that's fifth kid. Do you reckon there's something special about being the fifth kid in a family?
Oh, no, not necessarily. The only thing I'd say is just like, being my mum's baby, that was always kind of the thing, which I think keeps a very youthful, or in my experience, has been a very youthful way of looking at life, playful, not necessarily so great at taking on responsibilities. And I'm sure some of that's, personality and some of it is just that sense of, mum wanting to keep her youngest child as young as she could for as long as she could.
And did you find that transition going to high school challenging? Excuse me.
Bless you. Yeah, look, I did find that I ran a fathers and sons session for some of the fathers and kids in one of my daughter's classes once, and we all talked about that transition from primary school to secondary school, where a lot of us had gone from, I was in a small school with one class where I knew everyone, and then all of a sudden, I'm 11 or 12 and I've gone from the top of the tree to being the bottom of the tree, in year 7, and there's, 1,000 kids. And it was really fascinating to hear how many of the men that were there shared that there was actually a really difficult time for us because you sort of, went into this huge, big world that feeling uncomfortable and with strong relationships. And then all of a sudden you're in this place where you're on your own a little bit more. And there's all these older kids and a little bit less connected or less sense of community in the school. So, I think that was a significant transition for me. Boarding school, because my brothers had been, and this amazing private school in Melbourne with looked like Harry Pottersville and beautiful sports grounds, and I loved sport. That was one of my main key things. So I was desperate to go to boarding school, following the footsteps of my brothers and go to this amazing school. And primarily a lot of it was about the sport. That was a big thing.
Yeah. It's funny, I grew up in a small country school too, like one building, one teacher, grades 1 till 7, 40 kids. It was just brilliant, like that small community, and being literally on the edge of a forest too. So recesses and lunches were literally running around like tribal warriors, having a great time. And I think it stands you in good stead for that connection with nature, and certainly a close association with it for that as well. Yeah. So I guess physio. Why did you choose it?
Before we go into physio, Doug, many years ago, I worked with Reach Out, which was a youth suicide prevention website. It was really the first thing of its first type of use of the internet for social well-being in the world back then, 25 years ago, that I sort of fell into it because my brother had started it and he was working on it, so I volunteered. But the reason I raised this is I spent 2 years traveling around Australia presenting to young people. We presented to 30,000 young people at schools and youth centres and all sorts of stuff. And what stood out for me was that whenever we went to a school where we had classes that were vertically integrated, so younger and older kids all in one class, those kids would come and interact with us just like they were nieces and nephews, like just completely normal interactions with adults. But whenever we went to schools where we started having everyone grouped in the same age level, there was a really different sort of feel for the way that kids were and the way they'd interact, and that sort of Lord of the Flies, you've got all the young people, they're all leading each other. You don't have those older and younger relationships. I think that's a really significant factor for a lot of us in the way we sort of develop our relationships and community through schools.
Yeah, and I go one step further, sort of when I was speaking to younger physios, to say, try and think what you'd like to be doing in 10 years' time, 5 years' time, and then go and meet those people that are doing it now. And then you can talk to them and say, what are you doing and why are you doing it and how did you get there and what's important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that interaction that enables you to sort of project yourself onto that next person, that next stage, and then think about how am I going to get there and what do I need to do.
Yeah. There's so much. That's right. There's so much valuable knowledge in mentors, which, in my sort of culture and community hasn't really been something very strong. And then also the value in, supporting and teaching people who are following you and sharing that information on. I think that's really, all too often lacking in the community at large.
Yeah, well, it's a resource which is not utilised enough, and it's probably underappreciated.
Yeah.
All right, so a little diversion. We'll come back. Physio, why, how, and when?
So I really fell into physio. Like one of my earliest memories, I don't know, I might have been 8 or 9, was remember lying on the floor next to the open fire in the lounge room at home. And I was, bending and straightening my fingers and looking at my arm and just thinking, this is bizarre. How the hell does that all, how does that move? And so, I had a sort of curiosity about the body, but then after school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did arts for Melbourne Uni for a year, anthropology, psychology, philosophy. I'd gone straight out of the maths, physics kind of thing. Really had no idea what I wanted to do, and mainly went to uni so that I could play cricket with Melbourne Uni because the sport was the main thing. And then at the end of first year, I sort of had this sense of, gee, I'm not going to be able to get a job with an arts degree. So I literally just put in to transfer into every course. I went through the marks to get in. I started with Melbourne Medicine, Monash Medicine, Melbourne Law. I literally just went down the list from top to bottom and applied to see if I could transfer into something else. And I got an offer from La Trobe to do physio. And at that stage I thought, gee, I'm interested in the body. I like sport a lot. Why not dive into the physio? So it really wasn't something that I went out searching for to find, as much as it kind of found me, and then it sort of made sense just to jump into it.
It'd be interesting that you had that interest in the body. You played a lot of sport. You never really interfaced with physio in a more direct manner before that point.
Well, I'd had a bit of experience through. I had a lot of injuries, a lot of chronic hamstring injuries when I was at boarding school, which now I look back and understand in a completely different lens rather than it just being a biomechanical sort of issue. So, I had experiences with physio. I wouldn't have got the marks to get into physio, and in those days, it was literally I did very well at arts, and so I was just blessed to be able to get an opportunity to transfer.
You got to the Trobe. Were there any particular? You would have gone better in the first year. You wouldn't have had any credits from your arts course, I'm guessing. So you started from the start.
Yeah, started from the beginning, with the cohort being I was 1 year older than everyone else, but I was like almost the youngest in my school for most of my life. So that first year I sort of was in what I would say really is my sort of standard age group, rather than being always the youngest in my groups at school.
And how big was the cohort? What was the split, male to female?
Gee, you're testing my memory. I'm assuming it might have been like, I don't know, 120 people or
okay,
something
so quite big.
like that. And we were at, I can't remember whether we were I think we were the last year that went through, we were the first year that went through Lincoln School of Health Sciences in Melbourne, when it had become now a degree in physiotherapy with La Trobe. And then I think at the end of my career or somewhere around there, then also Melbourne University opened up a physiotherapy school. So I would say it was, probably 60-40 or 70-30 females to males would have been my sense. And one of my recollections was about it being at Lincoln, where it was all just the health sciences, was this real experience of like the physios being better than everyone else, where we've got the highest marks. We've got the OTs are just physios who couldn't get into physio, and, everything else was. So from an early stage for me, there was that experience of like, wow, you know, the physio's a bit better than everyone else because the marks are a bit higher. And that was something that was really kind of quite obvious to me at that stage. And probably at that stage, I would have been very happy to jump on board and go, yeah, that's me as well.
Were there any particular highlights for you in that sort of undergraduate studying process?
Yeah, look, probably the highlights for me were, first of all, was the people. There were a lot of great, you know, fantastic people really across the board, I would say. So the friendships and the people that I got to know, that was a real highlight. The second one was my independent study. So I was really focused on sport and, you know, wasn't overly focused on my physio, you know, my training. I failed second year, had to repeat a year. And in my fourth year, our independent study, I did it in partnership with a guy, I think it was Shane, I think his last name was Kavanagh, it's been 30 years, can't remember. And, you know, everyone was looking at, you know, knee angles, biomechanics, quad strength, all that sort of stuff. And we did our independent study was the effect of patient attitude and belief on the course and outcome of chronic illness. And so what was fascinating is we were looking at all these extraordinary studies that were outside the main sort of physio journal models. And it was both a highlight and also probably a low light, really, is because one of the things for me, Doug, is I really felt at that time like it wasn't really welcomed. And we were seen as like we've kind of got two heads because we're looking at all this weird stuff that's not just biomechanical model. And it was a number of years later that the film What the Bleep Do We Know came out. And a lot of the studies that we had presented were actually referenced in there. You know, some amazing things about people reducing their pain medication after heart surgery because you've got people standing outside the hospital praying for them in a double-blind randomized control sort of thing. So these days there's a bit more interest and openness in the profession to sort of more of the psychological aspects or the mental health side of things, or how the mind and the body interplay. But back then it was a mixture of, I just found this totally fascinating, some of the things we were learning about but again, completely outside the sort of narrow model that we're in. So it was both a real highlight, but at the same time also a bit of a low light, because it really left me feeling like I'm not really part of this community. I don't really feel like anyone's interested or wants to know, you know, any of this stuff. But I was really, really interested in these sort of outside the box, you know, studies and research and information.
That's the problem when you break barriers.
Yeah.
You just got to have that conviction of, you know, this is important, and regardless of the how welcome it is, I'm just going to bring light on it anyway.
Yeah, and at the time for me, you know, there was a lot of insecurity in my life and in my background,
sure.
So that it was
just your age too.
That was, you know, it was just like, oh, gee, I'm not welcome here. People aren't interested in this. What I'm interested in, I need to go somewhere else and find, you know, I wasn't even aware of it at the time, but just that sense of, gee, they're not really interested in what I'm interested in here. And so that was a difficult time. The other highlight for me was, again, a bit of a low light, is at the end of uni in a final placement, I looked to do, I think, what was called an international or cross-cultural placement. So I'd organised to do a placement up in Derby, WA and Broome, working largely with Indigenous communities. And it fell through the week before I went away, which was a bit of disappointment, but I ended up getting placed at Cairns, which was quite an amazing 3 months up there. It wasn't very cross-cultural to much of a degree, but it also opened me up to the sort of, in a way, what physiotherapy offered me, which was an opportunity to travel and work and, you know, start to move around and see other things and not just be at home working in my own local community. So that was a real highlight. It was a great time, fantastic holiday and great clinic, but just, yeah, starting to expand my horizons outside of living in Melbourne for, you know, Victoria and Melbourne most of my life.
So once you got that first paycheck and you graduated, what was it for you that was most important? Like being a newly minted physio, did you like the freedom, the professional status? What sort of do you recall of that early stage?
Well, so as soon as I finished my course, in fact, before I'd finished my course, the reason I kind of finished was that I wanted to go overseas and travel. So it was all about using this as a ticket to go overseas. So I went and did the 2-year London visa thing, which was, everyone was doing at the time. So knowing that there was work over there, there was avenues to, again, for me was to play cricket was a big focus, but having the agencies, setting up accommodation and by all reports that was, so it was really largely about going, right, I want to travel. And when I reflect back on it more personally, for me, I had this deep knowing that I just needed to get out of Australia. At the time, I had a girlfriend she was also a physio, and she was super dedicated and working as an assistant at one of the great clinics in Melbourne. She got a job offer in one of the great sort of physio clinics in Sydney. And I remember looking at her and thinking, she loves this and she's so dedicated and she's so good at it, and thinking, this is obviously not for me because I'm not as passionate or as dedicated as she was. But I often talk about this sense of having to go away, go overseas, because again, it's not until I look back, I was always someone who's, highly emotionally sensitive. And so, I'd been in the normal culture of drinking and sport and all that sort of thing. And when I look back now, it's like I actually had to go away overseas. I went away on my own. I had 110 pounds when I went through the airport. But it was really about finding myself and being able to express myself outside the culture that I'd been in, which is university, college, lots of drinking, that not, superficial in that sense of not much of an inner world. I remember going and playing at a cricket club in England, and the first day they said, "Oh, do you want a lager?" And I said, "Oh, no, I don't drink." Now, I would have never said that in my life before that time, because the peer group pressure, to drink, I would just drink because of the pressure, not because I enjoyed it or I wanted to drink. I'd rather go out and have 10 milkshakes than 10 beers. Like, that was kind of who I was. But again, there was this sense that the culture I was in, I wanted to not keep just living the same way as that. Not that I've got any problems with people who want to live that way per se. So a lot of it was about going, right, physio and having this qualification was a ticket for me to be able to go away, start traveling, and have some way of earning a living and an income and fund my sort of, travel journeys, both on a physical travel, but probably much more so when I look back on a sort of internal, personal journey as well.
I think that's really interesting, because I recall when I didn't go west, I went east to Canada to North America for my sort of couple of years. But I, again, distinctly remembered, I'm not sure it was in the airport or wherever, but I just suddenly looked around and thought, nobody knows me. I could dye my hair red. I could do whatever, be whoever I am, whatever I want to do. And no one's going to say, oh, you're different, because it's a chance for you to completely remodel yourself. And I mean, most of us don't, but it is that opportunity to not be beholden to other people's expectations and just say, well, from here, clean slate, what I want to do, how do I want to do it. And, I love that sort of freedom that provided me to be, who I wanted to be once I had an idea what that was.
Yeah. I often described as going, I went over to London to come out of the closet. Now, that wasn't in terms of sexuality. It was just about me coming out of the closet. Like, I don't want to drink, all the time. I don't want to get drunk all the time. And really about going, finding out who am I when I'm not just fitting in with the culture that was around me. So, a hugely significant step for me.
So when you moved into the workplace, you sort of said you made a distinctive decision to move overseas for that sort of chance to sort of go on a journey and, I guess, in a sense, find and concrete who you want to be and who you are. Did you have any goals professionally or personally that were guiding you as to what you were wanting to do?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to earn as much money for as little work as I could possibly do. So, not real good professional goals in that sense. But I did a year where I worked in maybe aged care and hospitals, wherever the agency sent me. And after a year, I'd work and save enough money to then go traveling. I was very lucky. I did bike rides around the UK. I spent 2 months bike riding in Norway. So there's amazing journeys. But after 1 year, I was also really aware of like the hospital physio model, just did not inspire me at all. And I remember calling the guy who worked for the agency who would book in these temp jobs and saying to him, I want you to find me the job that's the least physiotherapy job as possible, but I'm still getting paid for my rates as a physiotherapist, so I'm still getting good money. And I was really blessed because he found me a job at a mental health hospital. And that was a really significant turning point. There was a physio there. I can't remember her last name. Her name was Charlie, who was the head of the department. It was only a small department, but we were working in like an old school mental asylum and bringing, and pushing for the role of the body and movement and exercise in mental health. And I found that a really fascinating field to work in and incredibly valuable. So I was only, a year out of uni, but I established a rotation for the physio students in London to come through a mental health hospital. So supervised students. And that, again, it was at that stage, that was kind of something a bit weird and a bit bizarre. And it also introduced me kind of to the field of mental health, really. And I remember one of the other physios, when she was showing me around on the first day, asking me the question saying, oh, now, why are you interested in working in mental health? And I'm going, oh, I don't know. It seemed like a good idea. And she said, oh, because often people who work in mental health will have had some association with it, their own. I'm like, no, nothing, no idea. I've got, and it was only months or years later that I looked back and went, gee, my mother had had experiences with mental health. My father had long-term depression stuff. Gee, I had a cousin who had committed suicide that grew up on the farm with me, who had catatonic schizophrenia. I had an auntie. Both my godparents were schizophrenic. But at the time, I'm going, oh, I don't know. No, this is not relevant to me. I'm just here because I want this job. So it was quite fascinating the way that, that linked me into that whole field around, and not just when I say mental health, it's not just about pathological mental health, but just the whole field about, mind health, for want of a better word, and the interplay and the interlinks that has with the physical body and the mind. So it wasn't just about, pathological mental health treatment, but just this whole mind-body continuum.
So I'm wondering now, you've finished your 2 years in the UK and you've obviously, was there a visa expired, so you have to come back? Was that the trigger that made you or brought you back to Australia?
Yeah, it was. And so I came back, returned to the farm. My parents had been separated. So my brother was back on the farm. I spent a bit of time back there in country Victoria. I did a job as a rural health physio, which I loved because it was, not so much work, a lot of driving, a lot of listening to the radio, primarily in aged care, cups of tea, so I wasn't looking for, client back to back to back to back. I was that sort of thing. So I did that for a number of years until then I went back overseas to Nepal and India and spent about, 8 or 9 months volunteering in Nepal, and then traveling around India. And in Nepal, I started working in environmental education. I found an organization that were looking for volunteers. And so I just fell into that. And that was really the first time where I had moved out of working as a physio. So for about 6 months.
Let's just kick back to that, because you made a conscious decision to deregister yourself as a physio. Was that before you went overseas to Nepal?
No, it wasn't. And I've been sort of trying to remember exactly how this came about. I don't remember exactly when it was. I think there was a combination of factors. One was I had to keep paying for my annual registration, and I was sort of traveling and living off the smell of an oily rag. So I didn't want to spend that money. But also, once I'd done that job, and then I came back to Australia after 9 months, and I did the traveling around Australia working with youth suicide prevention online. And there was probably two things. One was the main thing was really I just never saw myself going back to doing physiotherapy at all, because I'd tried a number of different settings and stuff, and I was always like, this is not inspiring me. I don't really enjoy it. It's not bringing me alive. It's fatiguing. It's hard work. And also at that stage, I was really aware I didn't want to just work one-on-one in a therapeutic setting. I wanted to have more impact on a broader scale, a more community-wide scale. And that was where the youth suicide prevention came in. So I think that was the main motivation. And it's not until years later that I look back and I go, I think I was also wanting to deregister because I felt like I'd been burnt a bit by the profession at my schooling, and not really fitting in, and my areas of interest weren't in alignment with the other, all the other physios at the hospitals or even in private practice, that my ideas and my interests were a bit left field for a lot of people. So at the time I wasn't aware of that at all, but now I'd look back and say, gee, I think there was a sense of wanting to distance myself because I'd felt a bit rejected and a bit hurt. or a bit burnt by the profession. But probably the main thing was I really just didn't ever see myself doing physio again, because I sort of thought, gee, I've tried that and it didn't really work for me. So I need to head in other directions.
Yeah, so your concept of what physiotherapy was at that stage didn't really align yourself with what you sort of saw yourself being and where you wanted to go.
Yeah, 100%. It was like, because people still say to me, they go, "Oh, you're a physio, are you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm not a physio when you think about a physio. I'm not like at the hospital, I'm not on the corner clinic seeing
I think
30
that's changing now. Like, I mean, we're
kids."
always going to have the sports. I mean, everyone thinks physio is
Yeah,
sports, and that's even kids
yeah,
coming through high school. But I think, the community is becoming more aware about the diversity of the profession, and
yeah,
they're kind of, quite surprised when they see a physio here or a physio there, and they say, yeah, community
yeah,
or aged care or pediatric or respiratory or burns or, what I'm coming to realize is that the training of a physiotherapist gives us so many,
yeah.
if you'd say clinical reasoning, logical planning, structure,
Yep.
organization. Those are all skills that we get.
Mm.
And maybe it's a university degree as well, but I think physio is pretty good at that process of gathering information,
Yeah.
synthesizing it, and then projecting it in a logical
Yeah.
way. They're all skills that we've gained unknowingly.
Yeah, I always remember, and I tell this story often to the people that I work with and train these days. Was on the last day of uni, one of the lecturers came and said, "Yeah, great, you've all finished, you've all got your L plates." We're like, "What do you mean?" He says, "You've all now got your license to learn." Like, he was really clear. He says, like, all you've learned now is enough to go away and start learning stuff. So I agree with you that the profession is certainly expanding, and there is a lot of variety. But at the same time, I'm really aware that for me to become the physio that I am today, I could never have done that within the confines of the physiotherapy profession as it stood, because in terms of like trauma or anything outside the physio worldview, there was never going to be an opportunity or an avenue to come in contact with that, 20, even 10 years ago. So for me, it was very much about, I had to go outside that, which is what often quite often a narrow silo that we often operate in. Most physios are reading a lot of research around physio journals, but probably don't read much outside a physio journal. So for me, I've always been a bit of a generalist, where I'm interested in a lot of different stuff and more so how they fit together. So at that point, understanding the connection between trauma and the body and how it affects the neuromuscular system and, our mind, all those sorts of things. Looking back, it was never going to happen from within the framework that we were, that I was currently working in. So for me, it's been very much a journey of stepping away from the physio profession, stepping into other sort of areas of exploration and experience. And then from that place going, hang on, this is actually directly related to physio, even if it's not something that's currently seen in the majority of the profession.
I think you'd be surprised. Like, I certainly know quite a few people that have had the same journey. They've been a bit disenfranchised with the narrowness of physio. They've sidestepped into some other profession, and then they've realized and grown that area, and then saying, hang on, like, let's bring that back into the concept of what physio, because I mean, essentially we're here to help people, and there are many ways to help people. And I guess the more avenues that you have to bring towards that problem, particularly when you start talking persistent problems.
Yeah.
And I think that's medicine in general. Like, we've got a great acute care model, and we try to overlap that model on chronic care, and it just doesn't work. So what we do is, you might, I didn't name Craig Phillips. He goes off, he's a dancer. He brings back clinical Pilates and rehab to the rehab model. Or I've gone off and done sleep PhD. So I'm bringing that back into, hang on, if we don't sleep, we don't recover. So isn't that a critical element to people's recovery, be it mental or physical? So I think there are lots of people out there that have realized this, or just out of interest have gone off, done something, even if it's business management, and then brought it back into our profession in different ways. So, I think that's the beauty of the profession, is it's sort of quite malleable and flexible, and is bringing back other things into it at the same time. Look, so I wanted to sort of circle back to a question I asked before. When you went physio, you had to define goals, and you found the mental health thing, and you found that was good for you. When you decided to leave the profession, did you have a specific goal or direction that you said, now I'm leaving this and I want to go that way? And what was that?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I would, at that stage of my life, I'm at 25, even up to 30, I I spent my whole life going, what am I going to do with my life? That was just, I never knew. So I was kind
Play
of
cricket.
well, I'd played cricket and I didn't go as far as I would have liked to. So that was kind of, that wasn't going to fund my life. But at one point I remember clearly getting to the point of going, I can't cope with this question of what am I going to do with my life? Because I literally just didn't know. And then I started saying, what am I going to do with the next year of my life? And then it was like, gee, I can manage that. So I definitely didn't have a direction. One of the main things that happened for me, that was, I had a young child, partner and a young child. But what happened in maybe my late 20s and 30s, my body started to break down. So up until that point, I had used sport and exercise as a way of maintaining my health and well-being. And when I got to my late 20s, I couldn't swim anymore because my shoulders, I had impingement. I couldn't get my arms above my shoulder, and I couldn't run anymore because I had chronic Achilles stuff. I'd had 3 or 4 periods of like really severe low back pain, to the point where I had neurological weakness and deficit. At one point, I couldn't go up and down stairs. So again, I didn't understand it at the time, because at that point, it was just like, oh, I've got this problem with my shoulder. I've got to do some stabilizing. I've got this problem with my lower back. Oh, that's because of a disc bulge. It was just that biomechanical sort of model and understanding. Whereas I look back now and I describe it at the time as like my body was grinding down, and I couldn't keep doing the things I used to do to keep myself happy. I remember calling one of my brothers and saying, I can't do everything I used to do to stay happy. And looking back now, it was like my body was sort of grinding me down. I had to find a different way to keep moving forwards, because I couldn't just keep exercising and moving. And then that led me to doing some Vipassana meditation. So 10-day silent meditations that one of my other brothers had recommended, where purely working with sensations in the body. And that was a major paradigm shift for me, because I'd had chronic pain. And then at some point on about day 8, when I gave up trying to meditate my pain away, the pain in my buttock, which had felt like sitting on a carving knife for 8 days straight, I literally got to my awareness to my buttock, and I just really thought, oh, I won't swear, but I was like, I can't do this. And in that moment, I let go, and it felt like that carving knife dissolved down to a pea. I was like, oh my God, that is extraordinary. But just like it hadn't done any, there was a letting go basically. And then of course, when I went through the cycle of meditating through my body, I got back to my buttock again. I was hoping that it would be like a pea, and it was like a carving knife again. So I started to get this sense of, wow, there's more going on than just the muscles are tight, or there's a disc bulge, or that sort of thing. And then in doing a number of Vipassana courses, on the 3rd course, when I was meditating and sitting still, my body started to rock forwards. And this was really like an awakening for me, where I was thinking, wow, my body's rocking forwards. I'm not doing that. I'm just observing my body and my breath and moving my awareness through my body. And then just when I felt like I was about to fall over and collapse onto the floor, because I was just relaxing and letting my body rock forwards, it sort of jolted, and then it started to rock backwards. I was thinking, this is bizarre. What is going on? I'm not making my body move like this. And then just when I thought I'd fall over backwards, my body jolted. And so I long story short, because you're not meant to move during these meditation processes. So I snuck back into the meditation hall at 10 o'clock at night when everyone was gone, and I started to meditate my awareness. And when I put my awareness through my arm started to spiral around all on its own. At that stage, what I go, oh, I'm in a P&F pattern. And before that course, I couldn't lift my arm above 90 degrees because of shoulder pain and shoulder impingement. And then after 10 minutes of meditating, my hand is in extreme range of movement that I didn't even think was possible. And so in that moment, I just started exploring what would happen when I allowed my body to move. And then I soon found my body, rolling and stretching around the floor in like extreme yoga poses, but they were often more spiral positions. They weren't all linear, front to back or sagittal or whatever. They were more spiral patterns. And having an experience where after a day or two of following this process, that my body had me doing a one-handed handstand with my feet against the wall, and I could press my entire body weight up and down on one arm. And 2 days before, I couldn't lift my arm above my shoulder. So that was a phenomenal experience for me, because I knew it was real. I knew it was happening, but everything that I'd been told about the way we generate strength in the body and all the muscles and all that, it all kind of went out the window, because it couldn't explain anything that was going on. And that was a major turning point in my life, because up until then, I always say, as a physio, I'd always assumed that was my knowledge and my skills that was the key thing in helping other people get better, which there's obviously a huge degree to that. But in that moment, what I discovered for myself, at least, was when I relaxed and let my body lead the process through the movement, my body had a capacity to heal me and improve my strength and my flexibility in ways that I could never do consciously. And that was a really significant, that was a really significant moment for me, because it was a shift outside the sense of it's up to me to fix that body or make that better or mobilize that shoulder, that the locus of control was sort of back inside the body in a completely different way than I'd ever experienced or been told about before.
That would be a little bit earth-shattering, wouldn't it? One-arm push-ups.
Look, it was absolutely, it was absolutely extraordinary. And I was trying to make sense of it within my physio models and all that sort of stuff. And it was a very wild and woolly time as well, because people would just say, look, you've gone crazy, you're letting your body move. And so it was a bit of a spiritual emergence or a spiritual emergency, however you want to call it. So, a mixture of all those things, because I didn't have a model. No one had a model for what was happening. And it was only until maybe 10 years later, when I got introduced to TRE, the trauma release exercises, that all of a sudden I had a story and a narrative, a model that made sense of why would the body move, shake, tremble, stretch itself all on its own. Because up until that point, my only experience with spontaneous movement would have been it's pathological. It's, there's something wrong with, you've got a tremor or a shake's pathological. There was nowhere in our model that said, hey, the body's designed to do all these things on its own to organize its own healing.
Yeah, it's a health and healing process as opposed to a pathological abnormal movement.
Yeah, that's right.
So you've sort of gone through, 5 or 10 years, I guess, of travel, volunteering. You did some Aboriginal work, some youth work. You did the Bowen therapy, got back into some study, had a couple of kids. And then 10 years after you kind of deregistered, you decide to come back to the physio model and re-register. What was the thought process there?
So again, at that stage, a pretty self-interested one was, so I was doing Bowen therapy. And again, I had just extraordinary experiences receiving Bowen therapy myself, and also then, providing Bowen therapy to others. And the main sort of thinking at the time was going, hey, I'm doing all this body work. People can't claim this on insurance or Medicare. I can be a physio. They should be able to claim this, so it would make it easier for people to access me and my services. So, it was really about going, wanting to make it financially accessible to people, and also incorporating that into my, the degree that I had that I wasn't necessarily using, and sort of honoring that skill, that qualification as well.
Yeah, I kind of asked that question because most of us post-school fall into physio with probably not a lot of thought. Some of us probably more thought than others, but I certainly was one of those that kind of fell into it a little bit. But you've sort of circled back, and I just wondered, what was the key motivation to re-engage with that sort of professionally?
Yeah, as I say, at that point, it was really about having the professional recognition that I've done this, I've got this degree, I've had this background, and if I'm, registered as a physio, then people can claim, and it's going to hopefully help my business and help more people get access to it. And also, I think there's an element of legitimacy. So,
totally.
Even these days, people are like, oh, Bowen, there's no evidence, there's no this, there's no what. But in a clinical setting, we can work with the body and you can assess the results. And it's really obvious in terms of what I've seen in myself. I dream of the day when we go, hey, let's do a physio osteoarthritis trial. Let's replicate the exact trial and just do 12 sessions of Bowen next to the 12 sessions of physio and see what happens. And from my own personal experience, I'm really confident the results will be as good, if not better, than a lot of the stuff that we're doing. And obviously then using them in conjunction is even better again. So part of it, I think, was also wanting to have that professional recognition, going, this is not just some woo-woo stuff that some woo-woo complementary alternative therapist is doing, but actually having a standing in the community. No, hang on, you are actually a physiotherapist and you're offering these tools, and you have the ability to assess the effect and the benefit for people.
Now we come to another fork in your life, Judy. There's a few of these. By way of background, what was going wrong with your body to make you start to look at this next step in your life, which is the tension and trauma release exercise process?
Yeah, as I say, it really started in my late 30s, where when I look back now, I just was having burnout. My body was breaking down. And at the time, I didn't understand it. Whereas I look back now and go, living as someone with high functioning anxiety or unresolved trauma and chronic stress and anxiety, that all caught up with me. And that was really what got me into the Vipassana meditation. I had to find ways of working with myself. And then it wasn't until I got introduced to the TRE and the trauma release exercises that all started to make sense. And I had an understanding of going, wow, my whole, way of just functioning the same as everybody else and just, muscling on, for want of a better word, had caught up with me. So again, I look back and think, I went through lots of depression, suicidality, just life was completely overwhelming. And when I came back to Melbourne, when we had our first child, I worked as a physio assistant at Banyule Community Health Centre, part-time, because I was really aware of going, I can't cope with any more pressure than that. I was delivering frames and picking up stuff, doing Bowen on the side, but I was really aware that internally, mentally, physiologically, I wasn't at a capacity where I could have functioned even 3 or 4 days a week, working in a job with responsibilities and, lots of clients and all that sort of stuff. So that's where understanding a trauma-informed model about what I was going through in my, nervous system as much as my neuromuscular system was a really key factor for me in starting to almost like get through the dark night of the soul and start to recuperate and start to build capacity again with a connection to my internal reality, rather than kind of ignoring it and just focusing outwards and trying to press on and live the same way as everyone else without acknowledging the unresolved sort of anxiety and trauma that I had inside me.
Can I ask, was there a specific source to the anxiety? Was that just a general life anxiety and expectation on yourself?
Yeah, look, I would say there's a combination of things of like just general anxiety, highly sensitive, nervous system, potentially related to, birth trauma, circumcision, all these things that, again, most people go, oh, what's that got to do with anything? But, all the nervous system's responses and defensive responses to life experiences are already online in utero. So again, not that we understand any of that or we get taught about it, we just go, oh, that's all woo-woo stuff. But so I think there was a combination of personality. My experience at boarding school was both some of the best and worst times of my life, where, again, not until I look back that I realized that I was just permanently living in hypervigilance about body shaming. And we called it ragging in those days. Basically, it meant people picked out your greatest weakness and that became your nickname. And we basically hung shit on everyone. And I was lucky in that I was good at sport and I was quite smart. So I kind of managed to, weasel my way through without being the complete target of a lot of bullying. But internally, I was just chronically hypervigilant for, 4 years at boarding school, which, again, at the time, I just thought I was just a bit tense or a bit intense or whatever. I had no idea about what the real internal reality was, that was going on for me. And so that internal pressure. So I think it was a combination of, nature and nurture, the same as for all of us, and not particularly one, I had this particular trauma and I had post-traumatic stress from this way, and a culmination of a whole lot of factors.
Yeah. Can you describe, Richmond, what's the foundation and the basis of tension and trauma release?
Yeah, so look, it's very, very simple process where all we're doing is deliberately invoking spontaneous movements in the body, most commonly shaking and trembling. And the reason we do that is because that shaking and trembling is a really natural recovery or restorative or reorganizational response in the body. So, if you think about it like this, in the physio world, if I'm in the gym and I'm doing a set of weights or I'm doing a rehab exercise or I'm doing Pilates classically, and the body starts to shake and tremble, what have we all been told? We've all been told that's a sign of weakness, a lack of control, fatigue, and it's time to stop the exercise. On the flip side, if you look in the mental health model, if I go into, say I'm public speaking and my hands are shaking, we've all been told that's a sign of anxiety. Or if I have a car accident and I'm shaking on the side of the road, we've all been told that's shock. But when we look at what's the shaking and trembling actually trying to achieve, and when we look at it from a trauma-informed model of the body, how the nervous system's creating defensive responses, you know, your classic fight and flight, but more importantly, the immobilization or the freeze or the fold response, we start to recognize that the shake and trembling is a recovery process when you look at it from stress and trauma. So yes, it's a sign of volitional weakness. So I can't consciously control that part of the body, but then the neuromuscular system has the capacity to release tension and reorganize itself below the level of our conscious awareness. So with TRE, we just use movements and exercises as a way to deliberately connect to or invoke or allow the body to start to shake and tremble or move and stretch itself in a framework where we're then looking to see, you know, what's the net effect of that in terms of calming the nervous system, reorganizing the neuromuscular tension, reorganizing movement patterns. Because, and again, this is for me, you know, Doug, where 99% of the stuff that we're treating as physios, nobody is choosing to do any of that consciously. Like, it's really obvious. No one comes into clinic, says, I'm going to have a tight psoas and tight upper traps and I want to have pain. It's all happening subconsciously, for want of a better word. And so when we understand that the body is creating these patterns, doesn't it make sense that the body would have also evolved with ways of coming out of these tension patterns? And that's basically, when we look at the tremors from a trauma model, that's how the body comes out of these habitually braced, tense, armored states. So that's the trauma model. But also when we look at what they call myoclonic twitches in utero, again, up until we had MRIs or ultrasounds, people weren't aware that babies shake and tremble in utero from, you know, very, very early weeks. And fascinatingly, that the body starts to shake and tremble, the sort of the muscles and the peripheral tissues shake and vibrating tremor in utero before they're even connected to the central nervous system. It's actually part of the way that the central nervous system and those peripheral receptors meet up with each other. So from our earliest days, spontaneous movement and shaking and trembling is an organizational impulse in the body. And so in TRE, we're just trying to create a space and a way so people can allow that spontaneous movement in a safe and self-regulated way so they can use the spontaneous movement to improve their physical health, their mental health, their overall well-being, their recovery and their performance.
Is there a particular type of client group that you think this is applicable for? Like, from when you look at who you see and what physios would generally see?
So, I mean, yes and no. I say anyone who's got any level of unnecessary physical tension or pain or bracing anywhere in their neuromuscular system doesn't really rule out anyone, does it? Anyone who's got a body and a nervous system who could be more relaxed, who could be more, you know, calm physiologically is going to benefit from this process. And part of what I love about it is using, you know, TRE is just one modern neuroscientific kind of model of this spontaneous movement resource, but it's been used in cultures all around the world. The Kalahari Bushmen call themselves the keepers of the shake. The ancient samurai, famous for being, you know, superhuman in their strength, but Zen masters practiced a process called Seikijutsu, where they would meditate to the point where their body started to move spontaneously. In martial arts in Japan, you've got Katsujun Undo, which is basically turned regenerative movement. So TRE is just one model and sort of a neuroscientific model where we come at it from a polyvagal model of trauma in the body. But what we're working with is a natural reflex, for want of a better word, that's already inside every single person. So in that sense, TRE is not really a modality. It's not really a technique. It's just a pathway to get people to connect to, you know, an internal response. It's a little bit like saying, gee, something happened to me. I got upset and then I cried. You go, oh, gee, well, crying's really useful, isn't it? Right. So we've developed a technique where you can help your body cry. So it's not about the technique. That's a natural response, which is already organically in there. But unfortunately, in the physio world, we have not researched this. The tremors, same as in the mental health model, have been completely overlooked and pathologized. And so not only are we missing out on using this innate resource that's inside every single human body to help them with chronic pain, chronic tension, injury rehab, sleep, all of those different things, But because we're currently telling people that that's a pathological response, we're actually preventing people from benefiting from it and effectively blocking the body's attempts to reorganize and heal itself, both on a physical level, but also even more so in the mental health field.
Yeah. Now, you've done an online course on TRE, which is free. So I'll put a link in the show notes. So if people want to follow that up and maybe give themselves a bit more exposure to that process, they can look at that course and get some more ideas and find out a bit more about how TRE maybe it'll help them or their clients. So you just come on a few back to the sort of physio journey questions for you. What's the hardest lesson that you feel you've learned as a physiotherapist so far?
100%, it is about sticking my neck out. And I can even feel myself in this interview, Doug, when I'm talking about TRE, I can feel myself getting tight. You'll probably notice the tone changes in my voice. There's a bit more force, getting more, because I get more and more defensive because I've had so many experiences of, being ridiculed or where's the evidence or hit down with all those usual things. So the biggest lesson for me, both as a personally and also professionally, is to be able to relax and say, no, hang on, this is what I know. This is undeniable in terms of, how this process is affecting, and being able to stand in my own experience and authority and truth and say, hey, look, if you don't understand about this, that's not my problem. To be fair, I did a huge journey of, learning everything I could about trauma to get to the point that I understand now. So I don't expect people who don't have any understanding of trauma and how that's relevant to physio to understand that. But the hard thing is when people just automatically dismiss it because of a lack of evidence or a lack of research, or because it's woo-woo or it's outside their current paradigm. So I think,
yeah, well, I hope you haven't felt that with me, because I think that what you're saying is very important, and I think it probably comes with a lack of awareness and understanding, and I think they're things that we should be encouraging in our profession. So
yeah,
double thumbs up to what you've done for me.
Yeah, no, look, I don't feel that from you whatsoever. So I really appreciate that. So again, this is the way that trauma works. We have associations and associated memories that the body's responding to. So in this case, it's like a behavioral tension and bracing, but this is affecting all of our clients, but we're not taught about this. So yeah, that's been one of the biggest things. And I know one of the other questions is about, sort of highlights one of the major turning points for me was posting stuff about TRE and neurogenic tremors in the APA Facebook group. And the reason was because, and it took me years to build up to it, because I knew as soon as I put something up, I was going to get slandered and hammered by people. And so it did. It took me a number of years to get to the point going, you know what, I'm actually confident enough to share this, not because people are going to go, hey, that's fascinating, interesting, there's something we don't know about, let's explore that, but knowing that certain elements of the profession are going to absolutely try and hammer me and hammer me. It still happens every single time, but over the last couple of years, as I've got a little bit more grounded and mature and solid inside myself, a bit more secure, it's a little bit easier to put it out there, knowing that people are going to try and just, smash it because it's a challenge to their knowledge base. So definitely learning to stick my neck out and not get overwhelmed or overreactive or too defensive, which I'm getting better at, but still a long way to go, because I've got a lot of history of, being slapped down or ridiculed or humiliated when bringing things forwards that are outside the norm.
Yeah. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. So for $200 or less, what's your best book, app, or other investment that you've made in yourself that's assisted you in your development as a physio?
So, I would say for other physios, the best thing I would recommend is go and do the TRE, my free online TRE course. And the reason was because for me, getting into spontaneous movement through the Vipassana meditation, that was really what completely opened up my paradigm and my understanding. So that's a similar, I just think that's a similar thing. And the great thing about it is because on that course, you can experience it. So instead of trying to understand the theory, you just go and have the experience in the body, let the body happen first, and then try and make sense of it. And then we often soon find, go, right, we can't explain this in our normal models because we just haven't covered it. In the physio world, you have to go to the trauma sort of silo to go, how do we make sense of this? And then you'll start to see the blends. But in terms of a resource for under $200, I'd like to cheat a little bit. I'd like to give you a set of 3 books. The first book is Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. And that's all around his own personal journey. He's the founder of somatic experiencing, which is very much a body-based trauma recovery therapeutic model. Very much his journey about understanding the role of spontaneous shaking and trembling as a positive recovery resource. So it's a really fascinating read and a good one. So that's the first one. The second book in the set,
in the trilogy,
is Dr. David Berceli's. He's the TRE founder. His book, The Revolutionary Trauma Release Process. And that talks about the really big picture about this spontaneous movement impulse, not just on an individual level, but on a planetary level, and how we're actually designed to evolve and grow through trauma rather than to be just to be shut down. And then the third book, which is what I actually, when I was teaching Pilates for more as 3 or 4 years at Health and Physio Clinic, where I was really grateful to have the opportunity to go back and work in that field. When I started doing TRE and I left, I bought this book for the other physios at the clinic, and that was The Body Bears the Burden by Dr. Robert Scaer. And the reason that was such a paradigm-changing book for me was he was a medical doctor who specialized in whiplash, and he was looking at whiplash from a trauma-informed model. So it wasn't just about inflammation. It wasn't just about biomechanics. It was actually about the learning in the nervous system and the habitual defensive responses. So when I read that book, all of a sudden I went, hang on, the things that I'm experiencing in this TRE and this tremoring model, and it's all of a sudden I can make sense, and I can say, hey, go and read this medical book where he looks at a whole range of conditions from a trauma-informed model, which really is saying, looking at the way the nervous system remembers, the way the nervous system learns, the way it habituates, the way it predicts, and taking in that rather than just looking at the body from a biomechanical model. So those 3 books would be, it's only going to be $90 at most.
Bonus. Get 3 sets and give one to your best friend.
That's it.
What would you say, and there's probably going to be a few, but we'll go with one. What's your most out on the limb decision that you made in your career so far, and what was the consequence of it?
Yeah, so I've been reflecting upon this, and there's been a lot of decisions like stopping teaching Pilates and bringing the TRE founder David Berceli to Australia back in 2010. So just, invested or lost, tens of thousands of dollars in going on that journey. So that was a big financial out on a limb thing, which has really been, one of the greatest gifts of my life. But what I mentioned before, in terms of when I think about what was the biggest out on a limb, it was about posting the first time where I posted something in the physio Facebook group. I put up a video of someone spontaneous, doing spontaneous tremoring, trying to provide a little overview to explain it, knowing that I was going to get absolutely hammered, which I did. So in a sense, that's what I'm sort of in a way most proud of, was getting to the point after many years of going, you know what, this is too important for people to not know about this. And it has such direct implications for all of us as physiotherapists in just about every field. And more importantly, for the people that we work with, because we see ourselves as experts in the body and movement. And there's this whole field of spontaneous involuntary movement that most of us know absolutely nothing about. And more importantly, as I say, we pathologize it. We actually prevent people from learning about it and using it for their health and well-being out of our own sort of ignorance or lack of understanding. So that's part of what I'm passionate about, is bring that back, because physios are perfectly placed to be sharing this movement impulse, or this spontaneous movement process with people for their health and well-being.
Yeah. And you've been pretty reflective in this conversation, and obviously in large parts of your life there. What would be 3 sort of key things that you would like to reflect back to your younger self, if you could pass that knowledge on?
Yeah, so I have been reflecting on these since and they were very, very, very difficult. This was the hardest question for me. I think the first thing was, if I could talk to my 25-year-old or 20-year-old self, I would say, first of all, slow down. Just slow down, learn about trauma, and start to look at what's really going on inside you, rather than just doing the do and, muscling forwards and work with my own healing journey first. I think that would have been the most significant thing. The second thing would have been about focusing on prevention and well-being. So, there's a shift that way in our profession and in a lot of the medical model, but, 25, 30 years ago, it was very much about a pathological model and treating that. And I was really much more interested in optimizing well-being and preventing people getting to the stage where they needed treatment. So I definitely would have done that. And then the third thing probably links back to the first, as I said, learn about trauma, and get an understanding about how that impacts and plays out in the body, because it plays out in just about every single condition that people come through our doors for.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not something I've explored a lot, because I guess I'm a generalist too, but I've got lots of different areas of interest. But I remember talking to some colleagues at Curtin, they use the RAIN study for a lot of their longitudinal data for lots of different things they start investigating. And I remember a part of a conversation with a couple of the researchers there sort of saying that they're now linking teenage 12, 13, 14-year-old trauma, parental abuse, that sort of stuff, with onset of neck and back pain when they're in their late teenagers, early 20s. And they've got a definitive sort of causality between those two things. So there's an example, if you're treating somebody with neck pain that's unresolving in their early 20s, and you don't understand the trauma model potential that it may have on this person, you're not going to help them at all, because you're missing the key point to their process.
Yeah, and that's right. It's really simple when you go, well, what is it that's creating the tension? Or, what is it that's creating the inflammation? Well, those things. And this is a really great example, Doug, where so most physios have probably never heard of the ACE study. It's like one of the hugest key studies in the trauma field. Again, this is where we're only reading our physio journals and we go, wow, there's a study that's showing that back pain is related to trauma. This is relevant now because it's in a physio journal, but the ACE study had something like 17,000 people in America who were part of a certain, health insurance company. And basically ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Events. And what they looked at is they followed these people across their lifetimes, and they looked at adverse events being like, your parents might have divorced. You had someone who was incarcerated in prison. One of your parents had, drug abuse issues. You had physical or sexual or emotional abuse, so different traumatic things as a young child. And then they show things like, the life expectancy of people who've had 4 or more of these adverse events is like 10 years less than everybody else. Their chances of having a heart attack is like 4 times everyone else. Their chances of depression. So the reason I'm saying this again is when we only get the research from our physio world, until someone researches it relevant to physiotherapy, then we go, hey, wow, trauma. Mm-hmm. Whereas when we look at the trauma world, we're going, people have been talking about this study for 10, 15 years. And when we step outside the narrowness of the profession, like I can sit here and say, we should all be learning about this, because this is affecting, someone walks through the door, they've got tight muscles. It's not just because of their head posture. It's like there's more to what's going on. I like to point out to people, give me a general anesthetic and all my tension's gone. So what's creating all that tension? Nervous system is a very basic way of understanding. There's a lot more to it. But again, for me, that's just an example where there's information outside the field, which I've been really lucky to have stepped outside and starting to integrate these other views and other understandings, and an opportunity to bring that back into the profession. But again, it's hard because most of us are only reading the physio journals, and we're not on that journey of going, hey, I want to step outside what I know. I want to step outside the profession and really work out how can we bring more back into it so we can inform ourselves better and just be better informed and more effective, and ultimately help more people, which is, why we're all generally in this business anyway.
Mm. And that's a great segue to my next question, which is looking forward, where would you like to see the physiotherapy profession in the next few years?
Yeah, so really, that's really simple for me. I'd like to see the physio profession become trauma-informed and tremor-informed. And so by that, when I say trauma-informed, I don't just mean, because in a lot of the countries around the world, and Australia is a long way behind the US or even the UK on trauma-informed models in our society. It's not just about going, how do we present our clinics and make sure that people don't get triggered? It's actually about understanding what is the role of these habitual tension, stress, trauma, defensive responses having in the physiology of the body, not just in the neuromuscular system, in the respiratory system, in the cardiovascular system. So that's what I'd really like to see. Again, because I think it will just make the impact that we're all having significantly more effective, not just on like individual pathology, but on well-being across the board for people. And I think that's part of what I'm interested in, is going, yeah, I've got a sore shoulder. Great. Oh, that's nice to be able to have that fixed. But for me, I see that for most of us, especially in Western society, there's a much deeper pain that most of us are carrying, which is around well-being, a sense of connection, relationships, really having an internal state of health and well-being beyond just not having pain or treating injuries. So I think the trauma-informed model that's where I'd really like to see it. And as part of that, understanding how spontaneous movement and tremors fit into that whole scheme. Because first and foremost, our stress and our trauma responses are about movement. They're not about emotions. They're not about thoughts. Those things tend to come second. First and foremost, it's about our body organizing defensive responses of bracing, preventing movement, or mobilizing. So it's just, for me, it's an absolute no-brainer that the profession expands in that direction, because again, it's going to inform and enhance everything we already know and that we're already doing, ultimately, so we can support people to live full, happy, healthy lives, not just, fix a particular joint, but actually move into the well-being and optimizing human well-being and happiness as well.
And where do you see yourself sort of focusing on the next few years? Like, what are the key things you're wanting to achieve?
Look, that's another question that's really stumped me a lot since you sent it through, because I'm in a bit of a transition phase myself. I've spent 12 years really focused in on TRE and sort of trying to expand into this tremor-informed model. I've recently completed a breathwork training, which I've just completely loved. Again, just see so much relevance that it's such a sensible thing that physios learn. This is basic sort of knowledge. So what I'm looking to do is start to travel a little bit more in terms of the TRE world and share a little bit more of my expertise and my knowledge. But I really don't know at the moment. A lot of it at the moment is about going into my own body again. Like, I feel like I've had this big period of outwards work, doing a lot more Pilates, a lot more yoga, a lot more mindfulness, a lot more breathing inside my own body. And I feel like, similar to what I went through when I was 30, I kind of had to go internally and into my own experience to find the next step. And I'm very much at the same place. So I don't have a clear picture of, where to from here. I'm probably starting to move into a little bit more of a legacy as I get over past 50. How am I going to hand over the TRE and the tremoring to other people as I get older? But I don't have a clear professional path. I'd love, if you could give me one, I would dearly love it. But I think I'm very much in a state of real sort of, yeah.
Just got a template. I'm working on myself.
I need that. Yeah, no, so I am very much in a bit of a transition phase at the moment, which I'm trying to engage really consciously and not just push into the next thing and go, I need to do more, as I say, more Pilates, more yoga, more breathing, more personal internal exploration to see what the next part of the journey is about.
Thanks very much for joining us, Richmond, and providing, I love it. I love the idea that we expand our profession and people literally put their necks out and they bring it back in. They take a few whacks. I certainly know the feeling. So I do empathize with that. But at the same time, I want to pat you on the back and say, well, thanks very much for bringing the concept of trauma into our profession and how it informs us and our clients. Because as you say, we're here. I think most of us are here to help people. So if we can find out ways to do that more effectively and more efficiently, then I think that's a good thing for our health model to take on as well. And yeah, just wish you all the best for your next stage, if that moves away from TRE into breathwork or other things. And whatever you do, step forward boldly and enjoy it.
Thanks, Doug. It's been great to get to meet you and have the conversation. I do really appreciate the support and encouragement. it does make a huge difference to me. And I'm learning that there are more and more people out there probably supporting and encouraging that evolution and expansion and of the profession. And it's often just the, keyboard warriors and those few people who are stuck in their own patterns who are really trying to prevent it or attack. So yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story. Hopefully it helps someone else out there who's maybe feeling a little bit disjointed or disconnected, or maybe it inspires people to dive into trauma or TRE or breathwork or something else, so that supports them on their journey. But thanks very much for giving me the opportunity.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Physio+10, in which I trust you gained some valuable insights. It'd be awesome if you could leave your 2 cents worth as a review or rating of this podcast, and I look forward to sharing the story of another trailblazing physiotherapist with you in 2 weeks' time. Stay safe. Bye for now.